Dave, I'm gonna have to go on mute because I've got that delivery happening right now.
Okay. All right. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. While we wait for everyone to log in, I want to introduce myself, the panelists, and the National Volunteer Fire Council, as well as outline how today's event will unfold. My name is Dave Finger, the NVFC's Chief of Legislative and Regulatory Affairs. I'm joined today by Kevin Quinn, the NVFC's first Vice Chair and a Director from Rhode Island, as well as Dave Lewis, one of the NVFC's Directors from Maryland, and a member of the NVFC's Health, Safety, and Training Committee. Dave and Kevin have both served as grant peer reviewers, and all three of us have represented the NVFC at criteria development for AFG and SAFER. Before we begin, I want to briefly introduce the NVFC and the topic for today's discussion. The NVFC is the leading national nonprofit membership association representing the interests of the volunteer fire, EMS, and rescue services. Our mission is to provide a unified voice for volunteer fire and EMS organizations in the U.S. We provide resources, training, advocacy, and programs to help the volunteer emergency services thrive. This includes resources to help with fire department funding, like our grant writing guide and webinars. You can learn more about the NVFC and what we do, as well as access our resources at www.nvfc.org. If you're not a member, I want to encourage you to join. It costs just $18 a year and comes with a variety of benefits, such as free training in the NVFC virtual classroom, access to the Volunteer Voices member community, and much more. You can learn more at www.nvfc.org/join. Today's discussion focuses on the Assistance to Firefighters Grant and Staffing for Adequate Fire and Emergency Response Grant programs, more commonly known as AFG and SAFER. AFG helps fire departments and non-affiliated EMS agencies purchase equipment, training, and apparatus. Funding for the Fire Prevention and Safety Grant program also comes out of AFG. SAFER helps fire departments hire career firefighters and recruit and retain volunteer firefighters. Now is also a good time to mention another free training opportunity you can take advantage of for a limited time. Through August 15, the course Grant Writing for the Fire and Emergency Services is available to take for free in the NVFC's virtual classroom, courtesy of MSA. This course educates fire and emergency services personnel on how to write a successful grant narrative in an effort to secure funding for their local fire and EMS department. We'll put the link to the course in this video's description. With the FY 2021 application periods for AFG and SAFER grant programs expected to open in several months, now is the time to prepare to apply for these important sources of funding. Today's discussion will focus on what you can do to optimize your grant application to improve your department's chances of being awarded funding. If you have any questions, please feel free to write them in the comments below, and we'll do our best to answer all we can. Let's start with AFG. Kevin, I'm going to throw this question to you, and Dave can jump in at the end if he has anything to add. Can you talk a little bit about what departments' top priorities should be when applying for AFG funding?
Yes, David, thank you. Thanks for having me on today. In terms of priorities and to have a good calculated submission, you really have to look at the NOFO, the rules and the criteria for the grant from AFG, and it's critical that you take a look at the high priority. As Dave Lewis and I and other reviewers have looked at several thousands and thousands of applications, there just are so many applications for the amount of funds that are available that if you're not applying for high priority items and you choose for a medium or low, you're not going to get funded. You really have to look at your priorities. You have to look at what the rules are in the current submission for the AFG or for SAFER, and really stay on the high priority agenda, looking at your needs and what you'll have in your fire department and making sure that they match up. Again, I stress the importance of looking at high priority items. And then the other piece is to make sure that you have all your qualifications in a row. And as we do in the fire service, we pre-plan. Same thing is true for your grants. And we're going to get into a little bit about the requirements ahead of time that you have to have in place. So we'll probably address that in a little bit. But high priority is my message when it comes to the NOFO and being able to follow the rules from FEMA and AFG and SAFER.
To add on to what Kevin said, and again, I think his emphasis on high priority is actually true. We actually had some discussions at the last criteria about narrowing down the scope of the NOFO and taking out medium and low priority items, because too often people think, well, if it's eligible, then I ought to be able to get grant funding for it. But when as Kevin stated, you have to look at the high priority items. There's only a limited amount of funding. When we look at $350 million, we may think that's a lot of money, but when you're talking about going across the United States, coast to coast and across to Hawaii and Guam and Alaska and Puerto Rico as well, the money gets spread thin quick. So when you look at things, really, the highest priorities as we see the applications and really for a grant reviewer too, we like to see, people taking care of their PPE needs, turnout gear and SCBA. We all need turnout gear. We all need SCBA. And quite often it's not just enough that it's old, but I see a lot of departments, and as we went through applications in this last cycle, departments operating with gear that's 20, 25 years old. And that's part of what we want to do is kind of help you, make the right story so that when you fill out those narratives and you fill out those applications, you can get that stuff replaced. That's for the health and the safety of everyone that's involved. So as Kevin said, look at the high priorities. Just because it's eligible doesn't necessarily mean you should be asking for it.
Thanks, Kevin and Dave. And just to circle back, Dave mentioned about $350 million in funding. There's typically about $2 billion worth of applications through AFG. So that kind of puts into context the difficulty that can arise in terms of trying to spread the money around and the need to focus on high priority items. Dave, I'm going to start with you on this next one. Moving on to the SAFER grant. How can departments use SAFER funding to improve recruitment and retention?
That's a very good question, Dave, because quite often I talk to people, they say SAFER, oh, that's that thing that hires paid firefighters. No, that's not. And NVSC has taken a long battle on that to make sure that there is funding in the SAFER program for recruitment retention. Now it's only 10%. So if we talk $350 million, that's $35 million. But that $35 million can go a long way. And I see departments, across the United States saying, we just don't have people. Well, what are you doing about it? And so again, the SAFER grant program under recruitment retention has initiatives. My own department is now in our second SAFER grant program, and we've done a lot to bring people in. We promoted some advertising, we provided some incentives. I went to my membership and says, what would you like to have? Whether it be college scholarships, whether it be incentives for completing training, whether it be awards at an annual banquet, whether it be some non-uniform apparel items that can be give away as gifts for people that do the responses, a lot of things like that. We also use some of the funding to send people to national level conferences to advance their level of training, but it's also an incentive. It kind of keeps everyone going. So again, look through the NOFO specifically at things under the SAFER grant program. And maybe a little bit of a pet peeve, it's more than just a sign. This last cycle that we just went through, I can't tell you how many requests that we had out there for people looking for LED signs. Those are eligible, but not necessarily, well, they're a high priority if you're going to use it at least 75% of the time for recruitment and retention. But it really has to be based part of the program. It's more than just the sign. It's a recruitment retention program, and the sign supports the program, not you have a sign and the other way around. So look at the priorities, look inside. What can you do to bring more people in? What can you do to keep the people that you got and incentivize them? And, even if it's $30, $40, $50,000 spread out across 4 years, I believe there's some things that all of us can do. All of us are suffering with the loss of volunteers, and the Safer Grant Program and Recruit Retention is an excellent opportunity to put some funding behind that, because people say, well, we don't have the money because we got to buy hose, we got to turnout gear, we got to buy SCBA. Well, here's a dedicated funding source that can help you specifically with those initiatives. But you got to have a plan. It all starts with a plan. Kevin talked earlier about pre-planning. You got to have a pre-plan that. How many people do I got? How many people I need? How do I fill that gap? And look at the priorities of the Safer Grant Program.
And I'll add a little bit, Dave, if I could, just on my own grant that we're in our second year. We were looking at increasing our numbers, and you have to be specific. If you have 80 volunteers and you want to get to 120 or whatever that number is, be specific about that number. And then what is the the contents of your grant and in different sections of that grant. And one that we looked at is length of service awards program, and we built that in. The second piece was a marketing campaign, because fire chiefs and fire service leaders are not, we're not marketers, and we brought in professionals to do the marketing for us. And we're really seeing a huge difference in terms of our numbers and recruits. So you can't do it all as a volunteer chief or any of you leaders out there. You have to be able to kind of look at the resources available. Safer allows you to tap into professional resources such as a marketing firm to be able to kind of make a difference in what you do. And we do a lot of great things, but we can't do it all. And then the other piece we looked at is our junior academy, our junior firefighter program. And we're working with our local high schools, as we always have, but it's more sustained and it's more practical, and it really is getting results. So being able to look at your local community, look at your needs, look at what's available, and then kind of find those constraints that you have, what the numbers are bringing. Maybe you're having a problem distinctively with retention, versus recruitment, but identify those needs, look at what you have available, and then kind of make a plan and be specific in the plan. The other piece of it is to make sure that you have, the measurable and attainable results, because when we read these grants, we want to see that the money is going to be well spent, and you're going to score well. You have to be able to write well. You have to be able to give us the message so that we can go ahead, and we want to fund everybody, but we have to follow the rules that are given to us as grant reviewers. So make a good plan and execute. Thank you.
Great, thanks guys. And we got a question from Austin C, which I think is a pretty easy one to answer, so I'm just going to go ahead and field it. It says, will FEMA be awarding more departments on a weekly basis? So I think what this is getting at is FEMA came out in June and had the first round of AFG awards, and then we had quite a big gap. I think they just now are back to making awards every Friday. The plan, as I understand it from FEMA, is to have all of the awards for FY 2020 made by the end of this fiscal year, which ends on September 30th is the last day of the fiscal year. So probably, yes, they will be awarding more departments on a weekly basis between now and the end of September. Dave, Kevin, I don't know if you have anything to add.
Yeah, the June was the release date, and they said there was one batch that came out, and then all of a sudden the well dried up. There was actually some technical problems with FEMA Go. That's a story by itself. But FEMA Go had some technical issues. Until they resolved them, they could not. But as you stated, the money has to be obligated by September 30th. So we're going to see some very large groups of awards come out on Fridays between now and the end of September for all three grant programs.
All right, let's move on to the next question. So AFG and SAFER obviously are federal grants, and there are many systems that you have to use to apply for a grant as well as administer a grant. We already talked a little bit about using the FEMA Go platform. Also, you need to know your DUNS number. You need to be registered with sam.gov. And we've heard from applicants that all of this can be a bit overwhelming to navigate. Kevin, what advice do you have for applicants on how to make things easier?
Again, I'll go with the pre-plan. Those are the three things that you have to do well ahead of time in terms of when FEMA rolls out the performance of the next cycles. Getting your DUNS number in order. It is a process, yes. SAM.gov, getting registered and being able to understand FEMA Go. You know, those are things that you have to do now. Don't be waiting for the announcements of when the next cycles come out. They are processes. They're not difficult processes, and you'll find help on the FEMA website, AFG website for all those. So you should be attacking that now. If you don't have a DUNS number, you need to get the DUNS number, because otherwise you're up against the timing problem, because the announcements are short. They're not a long period to get your applications in. So these other things that the gov and your SAM's number, your DUNS number, you have to do that ahead of time now. And that's there's plenty of help out there to help you get that assistance if you need to through that process. But that's the pre-plan right up front for any of our federal grants. So that's pretty easy. It's really the no-brainer. Like, go out and get that done. You know, the value to your department for the grants is just, when you're talking about a 300,000 grant or an $800,000 grant or whatever it is that you're putting in for, that's money that you'll never have in your district. So go ahead and get the criteria, these expectations done. It can be overwhelming if you allow it to be overwhelming, but there's help there to make it happen. And I would say chunk it down into baby steps. Take care of the DUNS number, get registered on sam.gov, take it apart one step at a time, but over the course of a few weeks, you can have everything in place.
Yeah, those are not really that complicated. People make them complicated, I think, more than they have to. The DUNS is a one-time thing, and it's easy to get. A phone call could get you a DUNS number, actually, using the references that are in the notice of funding opportunity document. And you only do that once. SAM, you do that. You kind of do it once, but you have to renew it every year. It's not that complicated. I had to have a DUNS number and a SAM number for myself, because I teach for the National Fire Academy, so I had to be registered in DUNS and SAM as Dave Lewis. But it's not that difficult. FEMA Go is still a process in itself. It's still under development. There's still some pains. I could tell you the FEMA staff people will tell you as much as anything, but we're getting through that. One of the initiatives that we're trying to do through the National Volunteer Fire Council has actually come up. We've called it Easy Grant. I think FEMA wants to call it something else, because they don't want the easy part. They don't like that. To actually simplify that, we went through, Dave and I and several others went through the whole list of questions that are asked in the grant, and how many of those are really relevant to getting a grant. And so we're hoping, we won't see it this year, but maybe in the 22 cycle, we will see some application options for an easier grant process through that. In the meantime, do your homework. If you have an accountant that does your tax filing, ask them for help. They certainly can help you with the DUNS and the SAM. FEMA Go is the actual application process. You'll have to do that yourself, but you can get through that. So, don't make it hard to the point that you're frustrated and walk away. I've talked to too many people that says we didn't put in the application process in because we couldn't figure out that whole SAM thing and cage codes and all that stuff. It just, no, don't let that do. We're firefighters. As firefighters, we never found an obstacle that we couldn't overcome, and we can overcome this one.
Yeah, I'll also say we at the MVFC and those of us on the criteria development panel, we work hard to make things as easy for the volunteer sector as possible. It's a constant adding information and getting our input. So, and we are heard. So, like Dave said, that what we call the easy grant, we're trying to move and make some adjustments in the current process. We work on that every year on behalf of the volunteer fire service. So I think that's critical to know for all of you, but some things we just can't make. The government just doesn't allow change for, but those things we can change, we fight hard for you to make that change. So, but the overall process of a grant is, it is not difficult, but you do have to do your homework, as Dave said.
All right, we've got a couple more questions coming in that I think I'm going to throw to Dave because they get back to SAFER. And I also think these are fairly easy to answer. The two questions: first, will the SAFER program pay for a lump sum retirement incentive for volunteers? And does the SAFER grant allow you to pay stipends to volunteer firefighters? And I believe the answer to both of those questions is yes, but you should look at the criteria to make sure that what you're applying for is high priority. And with that, Dave, I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, the lump sum, I'd have to look exactly how that puts in the, what we call the length of service award program incentive, and how they do that. And it may be in there. I believe the stipends is in there. There are a lot of departments, and I see a lot of departments putting in applications to say, okay, well, maybe the best way that we can get our volunteers in is that we're going to, I don't want to say go to a pay on call system, but it's a stipend system where we pay people to be on duty, to people for their calls, people for their training, things like that. And there are a lot of applications that we see on that. My only word of caution is walk softly with that. That might be a near-term fix, but if you've got your grant and it goes out in 4 years, what's going to happen to those people when you stop giving them those stipend incentives to do that? Are they going to walk away from you, or are you going to be able to come up with another means to continue that stipend incentive program? So those are good. Those are nice Band-Aid fixes, but it may not cure your long-term recruitment retention problem if you don't have a plan on how you're going to be able to continue those stipends when the grant expires.
And Dave, would it be accurate to say that if you have a plan for continuing those programs afterwards, that your application is likely to score higher?
Oh, absolutely. As I said, we're in our second SAFER grant program. So we went through 4 years. So when we submitted the second one, we were able to show how we were able to accomplish our goals in the first one, and that we wanted to continue those. And so we got another years in order to continue those pretty much those same programs, and maybe add another. We actually have 9 different activity programs that we have defined in our SAFER grant.
Okay. And one more question. When does FEMA...
Hey, let me follow up on that. When you just asked if your proposal shows that there's an expectation of your old local district contributing to something afterwards, that's going to definitely play in for a review as we're reading that. Same thing is true when you're looking at, PPE. If you've got, if you needed, 14 sets of gear, and then you were saying that you had enough for 4 sets, that you've budgeted for, and therefore you're asking for 10 sets, that's buying into the program. So when a reviewer reads that, I think that has good merit when it comes to scoring, because they're not just relying on the AFG SAFER. We're showing that we have a plan to take care of ourselves, but we need your assistance. That's the Assistance to Fire Grant program. So I think if your plan and your proposal shows that you have buy-in as a locality, and that you are investing, that's going to kind of get you some more points for sure when it comes to scoring.
Yeah, and how we sustain the program, that's very important, and that's a critical element on the hiring side. And volunteer companies actually, there are applications, I see that a lot of time. There's actually a percentage of the hiring applications that is set aside specifically for volunteer departments. And maybe volunteer department says, well, maybe we can't no longer do this with 100% volunteers. Maybe we need to hire, two people to be here Monday to Friday, 8 to 5, because that's when all we're working. So actually you would get a high priority, for that hiring action. But part of that, as Kevin kind of mentioned, is the sustainment. What are you going to do after the 4 years? We don't, I've been in departments, with Pink Slip Friday came out, the grant runs out on Friday, here's your pink slip. That's not a good thing. So you have to be able to have that buy-in, as Kevin mentioned, and be able to sustain the program after the expiration of the grant.
All right. Let's see here. So for the next question, the next application period for AFG is likely to open in November, and then followed by SAFER and FP&S likely in January. Dave, what can departments do now to prepare? And we've already talked about this a little, so maybe build off of some of the discussion we've already had.
Yeah, that's a great question, and it also leads into the one that we just got online as well, is when the next year's high priority list will come. Uh, you know, as Dave mentioned, we anticipate, at least from what we've been able to get from FEMA, that probably the next application period would be probably late November. That doesn't mean you wait till November to start. You know, the document will come out, you know, probably a week before the application period opens. But you know, today is the time to already start that pre-planning effort. What is it that your department needs? How does it align with the priorities? How will it improve the quality of operations and the life safety for your department and your community? You need to have that pre-planning, as Kevin talked about earlier about the pre-planning. Do that now. And what I say, go get this year's documents, the FY20 documents, and start your work off of that. Because I can tell you, going through the criteria development, there's not a lot that's going to change. You know, there'll be some different words and different verbiage that are coming out there, but what we did in FY20 is going to be the same thing that we're going to look for in FY21 with LEAP. So what you do is go that now. You know, already start working with your vendors, getting your bids, getting your quotes, figure out how much it's going to cost, how you're going to come up with the matching requirements, all these things. Do that now, not wait till November when the application period opens up. And then when the application period opens up, then let's get a copy of the new notice of funding opportunity document and see what's changed. And so, you know, the time to start is now, not when the application period opens, because when the application period opens, and Kevin talked about it, it's a 30-day cycle and it moves quick. 30 days runs a lot quicker than what you think it does. And so, you know, you should be looking at it now. What do I need now? Now, the tough part is all the 20 awards haven't been gone out. So some of you may not know whether you're going to get an award off the FY20 application cycle, but you know, let's just start planning on it now and think about, well, let's have plan A. If this gets awarded, then what's our next requirement that meets a high priority? If this doesn't get awarded, how can I improve that application, do better the next time?
And Dave, just to clarify, you mentioned in there the notice of funding opportunity. That's the document that, or the NOFO, that's the document that has the list of high, medium, and low priorities, as well as basically all of the grant criteria, right?
Absolutely. I often call that the rule book. You know, I wouldn't imagine going out and playing football or baseball, depending on, you know, what your favorite sport is or whatever your favorite sport is, without reading the rule book. You know, what constitutes a touchdown? What are the penalties? What are, you know, what's a field goal? What do I need? How many players can be on the field? And, you know, this, that, and the other. That's the rule book. Well, here's our rule book here. You know, what constitutes a touchdown, i.e. an award? What constitutes a penalty, a non-award? And so we need to understand the difference. So read the rule book if you're going to play the game.
Yeah, if you're going to be applying for a grant, you need to read that, the NOFO. You know, it's critical because those are the rules. And if you don't know the rules, you can't play the game.
And the notice of funding opportunity document for FY 2020 is available now on the AFG and the SAFER websites. We're going to post links to those websites here in the meeting. But you can also just find them by Googling. And you can actually go and open up the notice of funding opportunity and look at what the high, medium, low priority items are. And again, you'll want to look at the NOFO again for FY 2021 when it comes out, like Dave said, about a week before the application period opens. But really what you want to be doing then is comparing FY 2021 to 2020 to make sure that there aren't some changes that you need to account for in your application. But you can learn, you know, 95% of what you need from last year's NOFO, and then just go ahead and update it with the current year NOFO when it comes out. Again, probably about a week before the application period actually opens.
And as a former educator, I would say that is your homework. When we're done with this session, you know, at 2-ish today, get that link from us and go and read that. That's your homework. That's your first start if you're really looking to put in an application. And look at that 2020. And then, like we're all saying here, it may tweak a little bit, but that's your homework for sure.
All right. Let's get to the next question here. So the success rate for volunteer fire departments in AFG is typically around 20%, meaning that about 20% of the applications submitted are funded. Meanwhile, the success rate for VFDs and SAFER is typically about 30 to 40%. Kevin, with so much competition for funding, what do you say to a department that has applied and been turned down several times in a row? How can they improve their chances of receiving funding?
The key, Dave, is being able to write and follow directions. That's really the key to successful grants and those needs that are there. If I were to pick two words, in terms of being able to make a difference, that would be firefighter safety. And if you look at recruitment, retention, firefighter safety comes into play in all of that, because if we're not running with the right response numbers, we are putting ourselves at risk. But being able to write clearly, concisely, making sure you're following the directions, you're not missing any part of the scope of the rule book, making sure that you have all your data that is consistent and you don't have any gaps. Following those guidelines in the NOFO and being able to, again, look at that high priority list, and that's what you're looking for. But showing that you have a need and that grant can help fulfill that need, and make sure that you're following the processes that are all intact. Clear and concise writing. If you're not a great writer, find someone that can write for you. We have used in the MBFC retired college professors to help with certain departments write grants. Some of the big metros, they have grant writers on staff in the cities. We don't have that luxury. So, but you have to have someone that can write clearly, concisely, and get the message across. I would say of all the applications that I have read and found, the theme of the lack of being able to follow directions probably is why the scores are so low in so many. And therefore, the competitiveness of grants that we have, and that the 350 million each, but as you said, the huge needs that we have as a country just outweigh. So the better you write, the more clear and concise your message is, the consistency that you have in your grant in terms of filling the needs and obtaining the ultimate outcomes, whether it be gaining new firefighters or whatever it is that grant is shooting for. But clear and concise, follow directions, that's going to help you be much, much more competitive.
My advice is turned down is not necessarily turned away, and don't give up. Give it another try. Make sure that first what you're asking for fits with the high priorities. We can't underemphasize. And some departments hurt themselves because they have high priority items, and then they'll throw in some other stuff because they figure, well, we can ask for more because we haven't asked for a whole lot of money. So hey, let's throw in, well, those other things may be medium or low priorities. And what happens is by the time the scores average out, your high priority items are no longer high priority because you had some medium or low priorities. So focus on what your greatest need is. And if you need it, and you don't need a shopping list. I've seen applications look like they were outfitting a whole fire department. And what is your greatest need today? And maybe if you need more, then let's think about what do we need today, then come back next year for the next thing. And don't ever give up, but as Kevin says, make sure what you write is clear and concise. I've seen narratives that says we need new turnout gear because our old turnout gear is old. And that's all one sentence. That doesn't tell me enough, and as a peer reviewer, sometimes we try to read between the lines, because we know that small volunteer departments don't have a professional grant writer on staff. They may not have a lot of writing expertise and practice, but if they told me enough to make me understand why they need it and why they need it more than the next person, and that's tough. Get somebody else, even if the professional school teacher, somebody out. In my departments, we have some administrative members, that come here just to help out. They don't want to ride fire trucks and ambulances, but give them a job. And so, the thing is, don't give up. And we, through NVFC, and anytime I've gone out across the country and taught a workshop, I've handed out my business card and says, send me your application. I'll review it. I promise you I'll hurt your feelings because I'll send it back with more red ink than black ink. But in the end, I think that we have a pretty high level of success by trying to help departments out. And we've done that through NVFC, and I've done it personally in order to try some help departments out with some mentoring efforts to help you guide through the application process.
And I would just add to this, there's so much power in your story as a fire department. There's so much power, but making sure that you share your story in a way that we can understand your story. That's the critical piece. But there's a lot of power in your story, and we know there's a lot of need, for sure.
So you both kind of touched on finding if you as the chief or whoever in the department isn't necessarily comfortable writing a grant or doesn't think they do a good job writing a grant, finding somebody else who might be able to help. I'll pose this to both of you, starting with Kevin. What are your thoughts on whether or not departments ought to hire a grant writer?
Well, I guess my passion is volunteer. It has been for my life to volunteer. So I think if there's a way to find someone to support you at the volunteer fire department, I think you're better off to find the right connection, someone local that knows your department, maybe knows your members. Is probably going to be able to help you tell your story better as you sit down. Dave will probably agree. We've read far too many grants over the years that have been boilerplates from grant writers. Now, there are some great professional grant writers, but there are also those that are out there just marketing and giving the same boilerplate template to department after department. Don't fall into that trap. So if you do go out for a professional grant writer, make sure you do your homework and look at references and speak to those departments that may have been successful with that grant writer. I have nothing against the grant writer, and the grant will pay for that grant writer fee. However, I think you can find that you'll have a better story to tell with more power if you had someone that's more committed to your department. Dave?
My thing's always been that your application needs to tell me about your problem, your solution. And as Kevin, stated, a number of the grant writers take a Buller template. It worked once, so it'll work here, it'll work there, it'll work there. And I can tell you, when we start reading applications on a Monday, usually by Tuesday, Wednesday at latest, we can tell there's a grant writer in XYZ state. And they're going all over the place because we read basically the same application a dozen times. And I can tell you the unfortunate side of that too is that when FEMA finds that out, the whole batch of applications will get turned down because FEMA, in FEMA's eyes, you're not telling your problem, your solution. And so I often say you don't need a grant writer, and I understand the hesitancy some departments have. And as Kevin says, there are some good ones out there. Make sure that make sure you read what they send. Because I've read some that had some outright lies. I've had some that took the template and they didn't change certain parts of it, and it was duplicated, had another department's name even in the application. So the bottom line is when you submit that application, you still are held accountable by federal law for what the content of that application is. And if that grant writer misrepresents you, they're not coming after him or her, they're coming after you as the applicant. So you don't need one. If you really think you need one, the grant will allow you to pay. You're going to pay that $1,000, $1,500, whatever it is up front. You can put that as part of the grant cost. And if you get the grant, then you get reimbursed. If you don't, you spent the money and not get it. But my personal opinion is you don't need it. But there are some good grant writers. Some of them are personal friends of mine. We have conversations. Some of them have tried to hire me, and I said no, I can't do that. As long as I do this as a volunteer, I can't accept a single dime for writing a grant. But do your homework, look at who they've written grants for, talk to them, and more importantly, read what they're writing about you and make sure you agree with that.
And remember, I said the power of your story is local, and that's that you don't want to lose that. That's really the guts to the entire process for us as reviewers.
All right, we've got a couple more user questions or participant questions. I think we can knock these out pretty quick. One, can safer funds be used to increase career salaries as part of retention? I believe the answer to that is no. Safer funds for hiring can be used to hire new firefighters. In some cases, they can be used to retain existing firefighters, but I don't believe that safer funds can be used to bump up the salaries of career firefighters. Dave or Kevin, do either of you have?
I would agree with you. I'd agree with you that you can't. But what that does bring an important part is that the safer application, the hiring part is separate from recruitment retention. So you actually can have two safer applications in. If you wanted to hire, like I said, a couple people to have some daytime staffing and at the same time put out all these things for recruitment retention, you actually can have two applications in the system, one for hiring actions and one for recruitment retention actions. So you don't have to flip a coin and decide, well, am I going to go for money for hiring or am I going to do it for recruitment retention? You actually could go after both to meet your needs. How does your department now align with NFPA? For most of us, it's going to be 1720, 1710 for career departments, 1720 for volunteer departments.
And then another question, can you ask for money to start a college scholarship program and money to get you through 4 years of stipend payments in one safer grant in order to save funds for equipment purchases? So I think the answer to this is yes, you can, but you want to be careful because if either of your grant activities don't score well, it's probably going to hurt the other grant activity. And in order to save funds for equipment purchases, probably not something you want to put in the grant, that we've got all this money, but we're going to put it towards equipment purchases. So we need the federal funding for the scholarship program and the stipend payments. I think if you provide information about your budget and can show that the stipend payments and the scholarship payments are not budgeted for, that would be probably the way to go. Dave, Kevin, anything to add to that?
I wouldn't add anything, Dave. I think you hit it right on the nail.
Yeah, I mean, I'd agree. I mean, definitely the college scholarship program is an eligible item under the SAFER. Stipends are eligible under SAFER. And in effect, yes, that's what it does. I mean, again, you would have SAFER allocated funding there, and therefore it does not have a negative impact to your budget for your normal operational and equipment purchases. But I wouldn't brag about that, as Dave says, because it said, oh, well, gee, you just want us to pay for it, and so you don't have to pay for it. But it does do that, It absolutely. I mean, most of us do not have a budget allocation for these recruitment retention incentives because of the high cost of equipment, and so therefore the SAFER grant program allows us to do these recruitment retention incentives and continue our normal operational budget needs.
And that kind of leads into that next question that's there, Dave. Greg H. has a department that has about $2 million in cash reserves. His question is, how does this affect review and approval process? Well, if you have $2 million in reserves, if you have a plan, you have to share that plan with us in terms of what your capital improvements are, that we understand what your needs are, your gaps are, and what your plan is. So it really doesn't hurt you to have $2 million in cash reserves, as long as we can understand the overall picture of how you're going to be spending those funds and why you're asking us or they're asking the AFG or SAFER for these other funds. We can look at it separately, providing we know the details that you're sharing with us about that reserve account.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of applications that the department was honest and says that we had X amount of dollars in cash reserve, but they specifically says that, we put so much money aside each year because every 10 years we buy a piece of apparatus. So therefore, we have it. Or we're putting money aside because we've got a plan that in 5 years we're going to replace our building. So there's a dedicated purpose for it. And in some cases, it's a legislative purposes. There are some areas that actually either through the local municipality or the local government that actually requires them to set some money aside each year into a reserve account so that they don't kind of come back to the local government and say, hey, I need $500,000 to replace this fire engine. Well, they kind of force them to put money aside each year so that they're not coming back to the local government looking for that. So reserves can and cannot hurt you, but for the most part, tell us the story. And I've looked at a lot of them that says, okay, they've got the story. There's a reason why they've got money in the bank, and it's a dedicated fund.
All right, going back to questions here. One thing that we tend to hear from applicants from smaller departments is that too much funding goes to larger agencies. If you look at the data on how funding is distributed, at least in AFG, that's not really true. More funding goes to rural areas than any other urban or suburban through AFG. However, there are certainly advantages built into the criteria for agencies that have more call volume and population protected, which obviously tend to be larger agencies. Dave, we'll start with you. How can small departments level the playing field, especially when they feel they can't compete with larger departments for funding?
Okay. Yeah, I think the first part is that they have to realize, as you said, that there's a mandated requirement that there's that $350 million, and 25% of it has to be spent on all career departments. 25% of it has to be spent on combination departments, and 25% has to be spent on all volunteer departments. Now you take the other 25, there's part of it that goes to non-affiliated EMS, part of it goes to state fire training academies. 10% of that gets spun off to the fire prevention and safety program. And then there's a little bit left over that sprinkles among the 325% buckets, if you would. So really what you're doing is you're thinking about, you're not competing against the city of New York. As a small department in whatever state you're in, you are competing against the 25% money to all volunteer departments. So again, it's about telling your story and making me cry. I often say, I've written applications sometimes that says, gee, I wish I had the money in my bank account. I'd write the check for them because they're so poor they can't pay attention. The main thing is to think about, you're not competing against the big guys. You're competing against the all volunteer departments. And yes, there are going to be some all volunteer departments out there that are bigger than you, but there's going to be a fair allocation of those funds. And it is about looking at the priorities, addressing the high priorities, and telling your story. What do you need? Why do you need it? And how's it going to make life better for your community and the firefighters that serve your community?
Yeah, and I'll just add, the process when it comes to grants and appropriations, this process is very, very equitable and fair. And so fight the fight, do the homework, submit clear and concise, follow the directions, and you'll find that your application will other and it's a fair process.
Kevin, I don't know if it's just
Kevin,
me, but I'm having some trouble hearing you there.
Yeah, Kevin, we lost your volume. Your volume faded out on us. No.
All right, we're going to move on to the next question, and I will toss it to Dave first while Kevin gets situated. So a lot of departments have limited funding and are understandably concerned about meeting the cost share requirements for AFG. There are, I think, for small departments with protecting populations of 10,000 or less, I think the cost share is 5%, and it goes up as your department gets bigger. That's under AFG. There's no cost share for safer recruitment and retention grants. But Dave, can you talk a little bit about the waiver process through AFG for the cost share?
Sure. There are some specific requirements. Those are outlined in Appendix C of the NOFO, the Notice of Funding Opportunity. It's not necessarily an easy process because again, it requires some writing, some justification, but it looks at the local economic, what's the unemployment factor, what's happening in your department. Did you have, a major flood through the come there? Basically, the government there. A lot of us had suffered severe impacts by not being able to do any fundraising during this COVID thing. So there's a lot of things that have affected the local economy, your department's budget revenue, and there's a process identified. If you look in Appendix C, and there's a link to one of the FEMA's information bulletin that tells you exactly what the eligibility requirements is. So, let's just say you're a very small department and it turns out you need $100,000 worth of turnout gear and SCBA, and gee, well, 5% match is, $5,000. But, I see applications where departments state their total budget is only $5,000, $10,000, $15,000. So where are they going to get $5,000 from? They go to the local government and they tell them, hey, you can't get it from us because we don't have it neither because our tax revenues are down because of COVID. So there is a process that can be go through, and the FEMA grant administrator can review that and basically waive the matching requirements. Matching requirements too could also be, there's different. It doesn't necessarily always have to be cash. There, if you're providing a certain amount of labor behind a project, you could do in-kind support. If you're trading in a piece of equipment, that actually the trade-in cost or the resale cost of that can be considered part of your matching requirement. So read the NOFO under Appendix C, look at the IB, the information bulletin. We really give you some guidance on there is a capability to waive the matching requirements. And as you said, with SAFER, the best thing is SAFER is 100% funded. So your recruitment retention and your hiring actions are 100% grant funded. And there are even some specific waiver requirements that went in the last couple of years for some of the hiring actions that the IAFF and some other people's pushed in order to kind of waive some of those requirements.
Kevin, did you have anything to add? Are you back with us?
I'm going to see if I'm back with you. Am I?
Yeah, we got you.
No, I think the waivers, they're there for those exemptions and those specific situations. So, if you're in that situation, take advantage of it.
And I'd just add the SAFER hiring grants, there is a local match requirement. Sometimes Congress for a fiscal year or 2 or 3 will waive those. But typically there is a match associated with the hiring grants. There's not a match associated with the R&R. That's part of the law.
And that's part of the blanket waiver that's currently in place.
Yeah.
So,
yep.
For 20, and I believe it will be for 21 as well.
Going on to the next question, Kevin, let's say that a department needs to apply for both a fire engine and replacement turnout gear. So this would be through AFG. Can they apply for both?
They can apply for both. I think you have to make sure you identify your needs and make sure that your story is kind of relevant to both areas in terms of what you have to have in terms of firefighter safety and response.
I often tell departments you actually can have or be part of 3 different applications under AFG. You can have one under ops and safety, which is all the PPE, turnout gear, the equipment that you need. You can have another application separate from that for an apparatus replacement. And the third one, which we really haven't talked about, but it's a good opportunity to talk about it, is you can be either the host of or part of a regional application. I promote wherever I go the regional application. If you've got 6, 8, 10 departments in your county or even your just local region that have, we all need turnout gear, we all need SCBA, we all need hose, whatever it happens to be, you can put in a regional application. And that regional application, then those 6, 8, 10, whatever number of departments it is, as small as 2, I guess, put it in and put one application in. One of those departments serves as the host, and the other one sign an MOU that says, yes, we're part of it. So I can have an application over here for, I need turnout gear, but regionally we need SCBA. So I can be part of a regional application for SCBA. and to get my SCBA needs met through that. I can tell you as a grant reviewer and even as FEMA, we love regional requests because now we talk about how can small departments compete with the big departments. Now you kind of made yourself a bigger department because you've combined those 6, 8, 10 departments together into one request. So now you've got a larger area served, you've got a larger population served, you've got a larger call volume, and with one grant award, I can serve a larger area need. So that kind of fills in we talked about that previous thing. How can the little department compete with the big departments? That's a way. I've had some very successful ones. I've helped some folks across the state of Maryland here in Western Maryland and Eastern Shore, which is some very small volunteer departments that have been very successful with the regional application approach.
Yeah, I will ditto that on the regional applications. We just don't see enough of them as we read. And those that we do see, we read and we see the mutual aid agreements in there, the automatic aid agreements, we see the collaboration. That goes a long way with FEMA. It goes a long way with reviewers. So I totally want to jump on that bandwagon with David on the regional grants. And it does make you much more competitive, especially when it comes to that call volume and those other pertinent numbers. The other piece on this, the 2 or 3 grants that you could be a part of, you got to understand that the majority of your grant is the same. So if you're writing for apparatus, most of that grant, the words are going to be the same. It's just a specific piece for apparatus, and then the other piece turned for the PPE portion. So if you wanted to put 2 grants in, or 3, as Dave said, if you're going to be a part of a region, the bulk of the work is already done in that first one. So if you've got those needs available, or you have the needs and the gaps, then tell the story and tell the story wisely.
All right, we just got another question. It says, how can a department confirm if applications are original to our department and not a blanket application? And I think this is going back to the discussion we had about having a grant writer and how some grant writers will use the same language for multiple applications. And I'll just take a stab at it and then toss it over to Dave and then Kevin. I mean, I think first and foremost, read the application. Is it your department that the application is talking about? If it is, I don't think it's necessarily the end of the world if there's some verbiage included in the application that was included in some other applications. But you got to make sure that it's your department that's being talked about and not another department. I think just taking that step would be good. And then, probably also just asking the grant writer saying, look, we've heard this is an issue. We're going to be reading the application, making sure that, what you developed for us is actually, a specific department. And, that would be a good thing to ask your grant writer about before they start working for you. Dave, do you have any other thoughts to add?
Yeah, that's I would challenge the grant writer. I mean, that's one thing. The other thing is read the application, I think, as Dave said, because if it's 3 paragraphs long, I'll just use 3 paragraphs. There's nothing magical about that. It's just the number that popped in my head just now. And it tells me the 3 paragraphs tell me the benefit of having new turnout gear, but not one time did it say, what is the current state of the turnout gear that I have? And how many of my members have either suffered a near miss or an injury because of bad turnout gear? Then you aren't telling your story, your solution. You're telling, I don't need to know the benefits of new turnout gear. I've been in this business long enough. I know that. That's the thing. You got to understand that it's firefighters reading your application, not some bureaucrat from FEMA reading your application. So you don't need to explain fire stuff to them. We understand fire stuff. And so it needs to be your problem, your solution, your story, and make sure that it's not a dissertation on the benefits of new turnout gear or the benefits of new SCBA or that's in a generic sense that can be reused over and over again.
Yeah, again, I don't think we can emphasize it enough. It has to be local, your local story and your local needs, your gaps, and why it is that you're asking for assistance.
All right, and at least at this point, this is our last question. I'm going to start with Kevin here. What is a microgrant, and are there any advantages to applying under this category?
Yeah, a micro grant is specific for a smaller amount of dollars, $10,000, and trying to just identify a position you have, a gap that you have, and you want to basically have that handled rather quickly. The process is, and again, and criteria development, we share the concerns on the micro grants, because the process for the micro grants, at least currently, is you have to complete the entire application and then you have to fill in the part for the micro grant. We were trying to get them to reduce, and that's why we talked about that easy grant piece, trying to be able to make things much easier for a specific project that you have that's not a lot of money in comparison at $10,000, and trying to get that process streamlined is what we're working on. But there's a major benefit to completing, identifying a micro grant as your need for fulfillment, because we don't get enough micro grants. And when we get a micro grant as a reviewer, so the reviewers, it's pretty easy to say, all right, here's a need, here's what they're asking for, here's the solution. So I think there's a major benefit to applying for micro grants. We had a lot of that with COVID, if you would, at the initial funding and all that. It was pretty easy that you put down what you needed and the money went out. So micro grants are an opportunity that not enough of us take advantage of.
I'm going to start, I'd kind of make a correction there.
25,000.
50,000.
50,000.
Yeah. A micro grant is less than $50,000. And so if your department is in a dilemma where 10 sets of turnout gear would make the world to you, 10 sets of turnout gear at $3,500, that's $35,000. Go for the micro grant. Now, unfortunately, it doesn't do a lot in the electronic scoring, but I can tell you as a peer reviewer, and I tell the folks, NVSE usually sends a group of people, 15, 20 people to participate in that, and I try to tell them, these are small departments with small needs. Give them a chance. Give that dog a bone, knick knack paddywhack, give that dog a bone, because their need is not that great. And it's not that, we can do a whole lot with micro grants, and we, as Kevin says, and Dave would tell you, we constantly fight in criteria development to try to get a larger allocation actually in dedicated to micro grants. We're not there yet, but again, as a peer reviewer, I see that, and if somebody writes a very short paragraph, but yet they're only asking for $35,000, okay, maybe I don't need 3,000 words of why they need a $35,000 grant. So it's an option that's worth pursuing. These are small departments, small needs, small dollars, less than $50,000. And as a peer reviewer, I'm going to give you an extra chance.
Yeah, I would just note there's no formal, as Dave mentioned, the computer scoring doesn't give micro grants any sort of additional consideration. However, micro grants have been around for a couple of years. We do have some data. I mentioned that the success rate for volunteer fire departments in AFG generally is around 20%. Success rate for micro grants is close to 30 to 35%, depending on the year. But one of the problems we have is, I think Dave and Kevin both mentioned, is there's just not enough micro grants. If we had more micro grants, it would be easier to spread the money around a little bit more. So definitely, if you're in that position of having, something where a grant for less than 50,000 could really help your department, consider putting in for a micro grant, because assuming that you make it through computer scoring, you will get additional consideration when it gets to that peer review level. So those are all the questions that we have. I guess I'll start with Dave and then go to Kevin. Do you have any closing thoughts or anything else you'd like to add?
Yeah, I just want to make a comment. Actually, Brandon, fella I met out at FDIC, and I had some discussions with him. He made a note there in the Facebook chat there about the value of the self-evaluation checklist. As Dave mentioned, there's a lot of resources on the Fema website, not just the notice of funding opportunities, but one of the things that's of value is the self-evaluation checklist. That's the same scoring criteria that we as peer reviewers use. This is what scores an excellent. This is what scores very good. This is what scores good. This is what scores fair. This is what scores poor. You want to try to get excellence in everything you got. And that self-evaluation checklist that says, in order to get an excellent, you need to do all these things in your application. So read those things. And then when you write your narrative, make sure that you address those things that score an excellent. And that's going to be in there. So self-evaluation checklist allows you the opportunity to read your own application, score your own application, the same way that the peer panels are going to score it. So the process is not that difficult. You know, some people call it cumbersome, but you know, some people, once they learn it, I see some departments repeatedly year after year get success because they finally figured out the code, if you would. I argued more than 15 years ago, probably 20 years ago now, when we first started this process in Maryland, you know, that I argued with Fema that we need to break down the secrecy, that you know, this is not going to the wizard, to the land of Oz and the magical wizards behind the curtain. We need to open up the curtain and let that out. And I can tell you, all the tools that Fema provides you on the website are the tools that used to be behind the curtain, how the applications are scored and everything like that. Follow the process, plan ahead, start today for November, so that you aren't waiting for the new NOFO to come out, because the NOFO for 20 is going to pretty much read the same as the one for 21. So wish you all good luck. Thank you for being with us for the last hour. And again, you know, reach out to Matt or Dave, and they can get to Kevin or myself if you have some further questions or need some help.
And I'll just add a couple of things. The NOFO, the Notice of Funding Opportunity, that link will be available. Get that link, start there, and again, start identifying your own local needs. The second piece is, I think I see a theme all the time when we read and review, but we're really looking to make our industry safer, and firefighter safety, it has to be part of what you're doing, because everything we do evolves around firefighter safety. So whether you're submitting for apparatus or submitting for PPE, make sure you're using the words firefighter safety and that theme of firefighter safety, because that gets to the hearts of us. Some of the stories do make us cry when we read them, but we're really looking to try to maintain a safer industry in the fire service. So get that NOFO link, read it, and then know there might be some changes in 21 as the cycle rolls out. But we wish you well. Really appreciate you being with us today. And the MVFC is here for you as the voice of the volunteer. Thank you very much. Thank you, Dave and Matt, and Dave Lewis as well.
So before we close out the discussion, I just want to remind everyone that the course Grant Writing for Fire and Emergency Services is available to take for free through August 15th, courtesy of course is available on demand in the NVFC virtual classroom. It educates fire and emergency services personnel on how to write a successful grant narrative in an effort to secure funding for their local department. We'll put links to the course, as well as links to the AFG and Safer Grant Program sites in the video description. I want to thank our panelists, Kevin Quinn and Dave Lewis. I also want to thank everyone who joined us today. We hope you found this discussion useful and interesting. If you have any questions about this discussion or have a question for the panelists that we didn't get to, please email the NVFC's communications coordinator, Matthew Odom, at Matthew, M-A-T-T-H-E-W, @nvfc.org. And again, thank you all and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
Thank you.